Hello, and welcome back to Full Time. I am Tamerra Griffin, and yes, this is not full-time review, but it's time to sort of step back and reflect, we'll say. Think of this as like full-time reflect, because we are at the tail end of an international window that saw the U.S. Women's National Team play 3 games, the first of which opened with a loss. Not something that we experience often against Portugal, 2-1, but they bounced back. The next time they met that team, beat them 3-1, and recently played New Zealand, whopped them 6-0. There were hat tricks in this window, there were braces in this window, there were continued questions about whether X player might need to be on that 2027 World Cup roster, and many, many more things. We're going to be talking about that today, and we're going to be discussing Meg's column about the NWSL's gender eligibility policy, or lack thereof. Meg, welcome back to the show. How are you doing? How's your fall? How's your October window?
I've got an autumn spice latte for this show. Tamerra, are you a beverage drinker with the seasons? Are you a seasonal beverage drinker?
I'm definitely not a PSL girly. Just need to make that clear. But I am increasingly becoming a maple girly. Maple lattes are really doing it for me right now. And I will never forget when you brought those maple candies to the New York Times office when we had that summit and we dropped them in our coffee. I think about that often. So that's my fall steez. It's kind of going to stop there. I love a cozy sweater. But I just kind of keep it simple because summer's my main season.
No, I feel like once it starts getting cold, right, my powers are just like, I mean, I will say we started having some snow on the mountains up here. So I feel like I'm ready. I've got my heaviest sweatshirt on today. I'm so ready for this.
The fleece is fresh, not pilled, because we hate that. I'm here for it. And it's time to start in some ways slowing down, but also revving up. I mean, we're not talking NWSL in terms of the sporting side today, but we got playoffs coming up, lots to discuss, lots to process, lots to sort of keep moving forward. But yeah, this October window has been really, really interesting. And I'm excited to sort of reflect on it with you because if you guys recall, last week, Meg and I made some early 2027 World Cup roster predictions. I'm sure you guys are aware because you let us know how you felt about it, which we love. Like I said last week, I'm ready for the smoke. I'm ready for your opinions. And please remember that this was just a 1.0 roster prediction take. Many more will be coming. But thank you for the engagement. This will, of course, continue to morph. And just because of how much response we got, I know how many of you are following us on socials, but if you're not and wondering where was all of this commotion happening, at TA Fulltime on Instagram and TikTok, we post so much sort of complimentary content from our shows and original. We post all of our shows on YouTube. You can watch our shows there. A lot of you guys are into that, which if you like it, I love it. And of course, you can always send us an email, fulltime@theathletic.com, with your thoughts about the roster. If you're just catching up to that, about this episode, anything on your mind, we love to hear from you. All right, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we are going to get into this October window with the U.S. Women's National Team. All right, Meg. The October window is essentially closed, definitely closed for the U.S. Women's National Team purposes. What for you have been the major takeaways? This was sort of an interesting window, I think.
Yeah, I mean, interesting is one way of putting it. I just keep thinking about what Sandra Herrera was posting on Blue Sky the other night of this. It started with what the hell and it ended with what the hell. And, I think
what the hell sandwich.
I almost want to I want to time out for a minute. I want to give you a minute to say I told you so about Portugal. Can we do that?
Yes. Listen to me, okay? As a Virgo moon, I love being right. So, listen, I am one of those weirdos who, it's not that I like when the U.S. Women's National Team loses, but when I think about what you can glean from a loss with a team like this, there's a part of me that gets a little excited. And I'm owning that. That plus, yes, let this be the last time we speak ill of Portugal's name when it comes to soccer. Everything else, colonialism, sure, have at it. But when it comes to soccer, sorry, the caffeine is hitting. They, ever since, if you walked away from that 2023 World Cup game and continue to underestimate them, I'm sorry, but that's on you.
Yeah.
And I think we saw that the first time they played.
I mean, so I think it is really interesting because, you know, again, we're looking at this window and trying to like glean what we can out of it. We're trying to figure out like what's a meaningful data point, what's not a meaningful data point. I think it's a little tough, again, to like read too much into a 6-0 result against New Zealand. I mean, like full credit to Emma Sears getting that hat trick, Kat Macario getting a brace, Rose Lavelle scoring like an absolute worldy Rose Lavelle sort of goal, which God bless her in that interview of just like, I just hit it, pure Rose. But I do think that you know, you look at these 3 games as a unit, right? And you see that disjointedness in the first game and the fact that everybody felt very individual. And then that shift to the kids, and especially the kids and Rose in that final game, right? And I think it's really hard to resist that like siren call of, okay, it's time to start embracing the youth around this team, because when you look at and you think, okay, well, would that starting 11 be prepared to play Spain or England or any like sort of big top team that you're going to potentially face in a World Cup final? And no, I don't think they're there yet, but this is the exact purpose of games like this, is to get them time together. And the fact that we immediately saw that response in terms of cohesiveness, in terms of, I mean, like I had the game on and my wife kept being like, what's wrong with New Zealand? And I was just like, we don't have time to get into this.
Right.
But there is this sense of, you know, can you look super fluid against New Zealand? And like that game could have been even more lopsided considering how much I think the New Zealand players kind of gave up on that game. But the number of runners in the box, the way that, you know, that Lily Johanna's back heel on the way to that first goal, like a lot of very good positive signs, but I don't think any single game can ever be a game where you go, okay, well, this needs to happen now. Though I will stand by my take and just say Lily Johannes needs to be starting at this point. That's like my main, like, I'm ready for this shift to happen.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny that the U.S. was playing Portugal, and I was just talking about that 2023 World Cup game and how easily that could have gone the other way, because one of the talking points from that sort of, not just that game, not just that tournament, but that sort of era of the U.S. women's national team did concern the midfield.
Yep.
And the lack of creativity, the lack of pace at times on and off the ball, the ability to keep up with defenders who wanted to go outside, fullbacks who wanted to go forward, certainly the forwards who had pace and were ready to go forward, and Sophia Wilson, Mal Swanson, Trinity Rodman, of course. It kind of felt like we were revisiting that narrative as well in that first Portugal game. And I think that combined with how quickly and sort of definitively the U.S. bounced back in that second game really kind of reinforced that. And Emma Hayes has some tough questions to sit with, I think, when it comes to starting, to your point, because I think about players like Avery Patterson, certainly Emily Fox. Those players want to be involved in the attack. And Lily Johannes, and I would say Claire Hutton as well, their ability to keep pace on both sides of the ball and orchestrate play, inject creativity, follow the lead of Rose Lavelle. I love Rosie and the Kids as like a band name, by the way.
I know. I was singing it to the tune of Benny and the Jets.
Oh my God, same. I almost said that on Slack last night. Rosie and the Kids, right? Yeah. Okay. Yep. Yeah, it works. I will to their credit, I think it's worth sort of remembering that the kids benefited a lot from watching that first Portugal game from the sidelines, until they got subbed in. I thought that was the smart way to go, especially because Emma Hayes is still developing them individually and into the style that she wants them to play. And you could definitely tell. I mean, you brought up that Emma Hayes had made comments after that first game about the sort of tactical errors that were happening. And we saw those adjustments too between the first and second Portugal games. So you can still see that things are gelling, things are still coalescing, but it felt like night and day between those first two games, which is a good thing, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. And what I do think is really interesting, I saw as people were discussing the game, that first game, the night of, Claire Watkins and Jason Anderson, I think, were both of a mind that it was actually the coaches had not necessarily prepared the team, that starting 11. It felt more, I think Jason especially was really hammering this idea that it felt like a strange rehash of the 2023 World Cup game, right? Like the way that the U.S. was playing a very narrow style. And then to compare it to in New Zealand, where if you're watching the broadcast, Melissa Ortiz is reporting like Emma Hayes is yelling at players to stay wide, right? Like she wants to use the full width of the field. So I think there was this sort of immediate change on that front. But I do think that, there were tactical failures in that first game that, yes, I don't think any player really had a good game, but the setup and the preparation for Portugal just felt off in a lot of ways. And I know Emma Hayes, like in the post game was calling it a blip. And I think it is a blip. But the question is, can you turn that blip into something that's actually going to serve you in the long run? And generally, I think we have seen that from the Emma Hayes era, that even when things go wrong, in the long run, it is in service of what will ultimately be a helpful process.
It is. And I'm kind of thinking about those Brazil games at the start of the year. They played Brazil twice, one win, one loss. This window was interesting because they played 3 times. And all respect to New Zealand, let's assume that they left everything on the field, but the gaps in quality and talent were noticeable, even between New Zealand and Portugal in terms of those games. And I just couldn't help but wonder what a third game against a more competitive opponent would have been like, given that the U.S. opened with that loss, bounced back with that 3-1 win, and then had to play a third against, say, Italy, who they will face in December. Which sort of begs the question. I mean, I'm blanking on the player right now, but there was a player it was Kat Macario. Her first goal with the U.S. women's national team, we heard on the broadcast last night, was against Uzbekistan in 2022. And I remember thinking, first of all, what is time? Because everything about that sentence is hard for me to wrap my mind around personally. But also, why was the U.S. playing Uzbekistan in 2022?
Yeah.
And I mean, like, that should never happen again. But that strength of competition in these international windows, I think the closer we get to the World Cup is going to become more and more crucial.
This has always been the challenge with Nations League, right? Like, Nations League really, it throws a wrinkle, to say the least. But I mean, to your point, you look at Canada's currently in Europe right now playing European teams. Australia is currently in Europe, right? Like, so Brazil, yes. I mean, and also like we don't even have time to get into the Brazil-England game. But there is this sense of, the New Zealand game felt a little bit more like an old school U.S. friendly where you would get that lopsided result. And that's not to say that those aren't productive for the team itself because, A, you're still in camp, you're still training against each other. Right. You are getting game minutes against an opponent. But at the same, I think it's just really hard to yes, it's great to see Emma Sears get a hat trick. I think that will absolutely help her stock in the long run because you want to maximize and take those opportunities against weaker opponents. But if you put that in the grand scheme of what is going to earn her a spot on a World Cup roster, I don't think a hat trick against New Zealand is going to get weighted the same way as a single goal against Spain.
Or even a brace against Portugal in the case of Olivia Moultrie.
Totally.
Going back to last week's episode when we made our roster predictions, I know we are feeling pretty vindicated right now after Olivia Moultrie's brace and that second game against Portugal in which they won 3-1. Sam Coffey topped that off with a third goal. Sam Coffey, the goal scorer.
I know.
Did not have that wouldn't have had that on my bingo card last year, but here we are. I love that for her. But yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about what this means for the goalkeepers too. two very different teams to be competing against. And yes, Claudia Dickey had that incredible save against New Zealand. I believe it was maybe their only shot on target off of that corner kick. And I think given how things went in that first Portugal game, set pieces left a bit of a scar, maybe. And, there's always something to be said about when goalkeepers don't have much to do for most of a game, except for that one moment sometimes that comes and she rose to the occasion. But I know Emma Hayes has been asked about that as well during this window, about how you properly assess goalkeepers when the levels of competition across different teams in a single window shifts, or when there's little for them to do. How are you feeling about the state of the goalkeepers at the end of this window?
I do think it was interesting that I think Emma Hayes was asked kind of like, how is she evaluating Fallon Tullis-Joyce off of that first game, knowing, okay, it's set pieces. Everyone had a bad game. Again, I think there were tactical errors, and it did kind of seem like she was downplaying how much of a impact that might have on her hopes. But I do think it's interesting that Claudia Dickey got 2 starts. Part of that, I think, is to help balance the amount of experience that goalkeepers are getting. I do wonder if, again, I think we talked about this during last week's episode for the roster with Mandy McGlynn not necessarily having like great consistency at the club level. And to be fair, part of that is the Utah of it all. Right. But I do wonder if, because of club form and because Claudia Dickey is with the Reign, who have been pretty successful this season, if that club form and now getting 2 caps is going to shift her at least into the number 2 spot. Like, I don't think that we saw enough out of this window to displace the current theory that Fallon is the leading number 1 candidate, but putting Claudia Dickey into a position to be able to challenge her on a more regular basis is only going to benefit the team.
I think so too. It makes me very, very curious and eager to see what the lineups are going to look like against Italy, which those games, talk about an early, whatever holiday you celebrate, if you celebrate at that time of year, treat, please, I can't wait. I'm still left with questions, but I'm kind of okay with that for now, because this was a weird little window, that first Portugal game, it's like you said, nobody was really looking good. The goals were scored in very specific ways. Still some questions, and I think that's okay, at least when it comes to the goalkeepers, because it's hard to imagine any other goalkeeper sort of breaking into this core group, this elusive core group that we've been trying to sort of articulate, that Emma Hayes mentioned back in May, June of this year that she is putting together. But let's move up the lineup a little bit, because the back line for the U.S. Women's National Team has also been very much in flux. I think we saw that in terms of the lineups as well. Naomi Girma, Tierna Davidson, both absent from the squad with injuries. We saw Kennedy Wesley make her U.S. Women's National Team debut against New Zealand. Emma Hayes had positive comments about her after the game, saying that she keeps things simple. We saw Jordan Bugg again, who I am increasingly curious about. But there still doesn't really seem to be much of a core there either. Emily Sams playing outside back, and who I thought did quite well, but it's also Emily Sams outside back, question mark?
I mean, I guess if your big question is depth at the outside back position, right? If you can make sure that Emily Sams has that, the ability to play on a wing in addition to center back, then that immediately makes her more viable as a very valuable roster spot. So in the long run, this may be a great thing for Emily Sams, even if it's not necessarily the position. To be fair, she's also a shifted midfielder to begin with. So who's playing their original position ever? On the U.S. Women's National Team.
Are a social construct, okay?
Yeah. So I think it's especially hard to read into just that starting back 4 right now. The team needs Naomi Girma back to try to figure that out. That I think is going to be we're going to have to stick a pin in it until early next year to figure out truly what the options are, which is, I think, slightly concerning, but also, again, we've seen the pieces can usually function well enough together, but it makes sense that set pieces were the real problem, right? Or also I think there was a real issue dealing with crosses coming in wide from the wing. And I think that makes sense that those are the weaknesses that you're going to see, rather than one-on-one defending or someone trying to come right up the middle at you. So, yeah, it's just... so much of this is really a wait and see, just because, again, this team is very much in flux when it comes to available players, and center backs is, as much as the forward pool is in flux, the depth there is in a very different place compared to the center backs.
I agree. I will say, when I think of the international windows, the latter half of this year, the one player outside of Naomi Girma, and even then she's question mark just, for health reasons, the one player who feels like the lockiest in terms of defenders for me right now is probably Avery Patterson and Emily Fox. Okay.
And Emily
in terms
Fox
of new faces, I guess.
Yeah,
in terms of new faces.
I do think Lily Reel has really helped her case, right, to be a more permanent part of this team. Mm-hmm. But I also think Lily Reel needs some minutes against Japan, even, right? Like, again, I think it's going to be really interesting. Italy is going to be a good test, but I want to see who they're getting for World Cup qualifier prep, because, even if it's Brazil again, if it's Japan, if it's, teams that we're kind of used to seeing, that they're still, I think, a better indication than this window.
Yeah, I think so too. And then we've discussed the midfield. The attack, I think, was also interesting. Michelle Cooper, you could tell that girl loves playing in Kansas City because she balled out against New Zealand. She, I think, is continuing to make a case for herself. Of course, Emma Sears, what a confidence builder that hat trick must have been. Kat Macario, I think, also with the brace against New Zealand, continuing to build confidence. And I was speaking with our colleague Melanie Nzide the other day, Meg, about Kat and how it's sort of interesting. We were just talking about, when do we sort of make that call to start, really focusing on her. And I still feel, even with the brace against New Zealand, even with her performances in this window, knowing what we know about Kat, she still has like another significant level to reach, which is both like thrilling and terrifying in the best way to think about.
Yeah. I mean, I do think, Kat has still not necessarily reached her ceiling post-injury. Yeah. And I am looking forward to seeing, like, can she get, like, if she comes back for these games against Italy, can she get some more minutes again? Can she make because I do think, like, Kat at her best offers something for this team that complements the creativity so well. Like, she is one of the most creative players on this team potentially, and if you surround her with a Jaden Shaw or potentially a Croy Bethune, Rose Lavelle, right? Like, the fact, I want to see more.
Just mentioning that.
More of Kat Macario and Lily Johannes together as well. Like, I think they complement each other really well. So I have been a Kat advocator from the jump, and I'm ready for more, for sure.
Yeah. All right. We talked about Italy, who the U.S. will face twice in the next window. But let's play a quick game as we sort of close out this part of the review. If you could pick, Meg, 3 teams that the U.S. could play against in 2026, who would they be? You mentioned a few, but just to make it official.
Yeah, I'm always pro Brazil because I think they offer such a good and interesting test. I think we saw that at the start of this year, right? The fact that it was a win and then a loss.
And they continue their form even in this window, as we mentioned.
Yep, and I also just personally enjoy watching Brazil play. And I think they offer such a good and interesting test, and also the fact that that they are going to be at the height of their powers at a home World Cup. Right. So I think they're super important. I also think, again, Japan is kind of one of my go-tos of it's such a different team than what the U.S. usually faces in terms of technicality, in terms of ball control. And so I'm always pro Japan. And then I think for the third, I am also like, I'm so interested to see Italy, and they probably would have been my pick if they were not playing at the end of the year. But maybe France. Right? Like, France is kind of in an interesting spot right now too, but like obviously have massive attacking talent, and that's always going to be, especially right now for the U.S., a really good test heading into World Cup qualifiers.
Yeah, that's a great mix, and you cover a lot of ground, I think, in terms of those opponents' strengths.
We got 3 different confederations.
We love diversity.
How about you, Tamerra?
Yeah, I'm with you on Brazil. For symbolic reasons too, just preparing for them to host the first World Cup in South America from sort of like a diplomatic standpoint, I like the way that sort of sounds and looks right now too. In addition, of course, to the sporting side, the way that team has been sort of like reforming itself without Marta these past couple of games has been like revelatory for me.
Yeah, very promising. Very promising.
So Brazil for me as well. I'm gonna go Sweden.
Ooh,
just because defensively, that is a tight team. Yep. They're a very mature team, and I think having a team with that sort of profile for especially the kids would be super, super instructive for them. And they're really gritty. They're super aggressive and physical. I think that would be like a low-key banger of a game. And then my third one, you know, I love Japan too, but just to keep it different, you know, given current form, I would like another US-Nigeria meetup. WAFCON champions trying to add another trophy to their case this summer because there's going to be another WAFCON in 2026. They looked good recently during their international window. Also, like defensively, a very strong team. I think for me, what's on the vision board for 2026 is teams with like really, really solid, sturdy defenses, just so that we can really test what this new sort of class of attackers is capable of. So those would be my three.
I love it. All right, before we move on to our next topic, I do think we've got to address the Lola Banta of the CPKC Stadium game, because that moment of the crowd just absolutely chanting "We want Low" multiple times before Iconic. She came in. I just I want to savor that for a moment because it was such a lovely. I mean, that KC crowd was amazing. We knew it was going to be amazing. Every time Michelle Cooper touched the ball, the fact that you could so clearly hear everyone being like, "Coop," right? Like, it was so good. I just want to I want to give a shout out to KC. They brought the energy.
Yeah, totally second that. They let the world know what happens when a team comes to town, whether they're playing for club or country, and that was totally on display. I think, as you mentioned last week, they also took notes from what happened in Cincinnati when Rose was not on the pitch yet.
They were like, okay, friendly bullying works.
Right. And Emma Hayes may have taken some notes from that too, because she was also very aware of what was happening and was like pointing at Lowe on the sideline. Like, I've heard you, it's happening. Please, like, just bear with us for a second. But yeah, that was a great moment for both of those players, 100%. All right. We're going to shift gears on the other side of this break and talk about a column that you wrote recently, Meg, in response to a different column. All right, as I mentioned, we are shifting gears pretty significantly to a column that you wrote, Meg, earlier this week that I think I'm just going to read the headline of it as a way of sort of introducing us into what we're talking about next. The NWSL's lack of gender eligibility policy leaves players vulnerable, just not in the way you think. Can you give us some background as to how you arrived at this piece, Meg?
Yeah, so Sunday night, Angel City player Elizabeth Eddy put what was a very long X post out, which was basically then turned wholesale into an op-ed for the New York Post. So first of all, selection of venue should tell us a lot, but she argued that based on her time as a champion in the NWSL and what she has experienced in this league, that she wants others to have a safe place to play, and thus was calling for a clear standard when it comes to gender eligibility in this league, and made two main suggestions on that front, both of which are questionable, and I don't think we even need to get into refuting them. But the first one was that players be born with ovaries, which is hard to prove in a lot of ways. No one is testing babies when they come out to see if they have ovaries or not. And the second one was a specific form of gene testing. And so I think, knowing generally the supporters and fandom of this league, it was not necessarily a popular column. I think I was immediately sort of frustrated because what we have seen generally from the rhetoric around this is that when people make this argument, right, and say that they're just trying to figure out how to have a fair game, the rhetoric ultimately falls on on players who typically are Black and queer more than anyone else, but almost like everyone is cisgender for the most part, right? Like there's now one openly intersex player at Angel City, actually, which I think gives us an even stronger layer of questionable why you would take this avenue. But the thing that really struck me about that column is that when it's shared on social media, you see Elizabeth Eddy's little smiling face in the corner over a photo of Barbara Banda, right? And we've talked at length about what has happened with Barbara Banda in this league and how the league has historically failed to protect her against even like side swipes like this. And, you know, in terms of like writing a column, I think we had a lot of internal discussion about, are we giving this additional eyeballs? Does it need to be, you know, like, is a column the right way to go? Is it a news story? And so we had reached out to the league and the Players Association and the team for comments, and eventually all of those kind of came at sort of different points. But yeah, that's at least a version of the backstory, a shorter version.
Thank you for the summary. One of the central arguments in your piece, Meg, is how, which ironically sort of meets the argument that Elizabeth Eddy makes, which is the concern around the lack of policy from the league. You take that place into different directions, but there is real danger in not having clearly articulated, like clearly defined stances on what gender eligibility looks like in this league, defining inclusion. I think right now the league is taking the stance of everybody is welcome, and that's just not cutting it
Have they
anymore.
articulated that, though? They haven't actually articulated that. And so I think, you know, there were a few points that I want to make. First of all, the lack of a policy is opening them up to both. I mean, you could argue this is maybe at least like a neutral approach.
Right.
Like, and I think that's a reach, but it's also opening them up to outside actors who have now, you know, so you go back a couple months and The Guardian was the one that actually finally figured out that the policy that had been put in place in 2021, which was not perfect by any stretch and had plenty of critique around it, just mysteriously vanished at some point before Jessica Berman came in as commissioner and has never been replaced. And there's been no apparent discussion of bringing it back in. And so instead, what has been put in its place is a lot of quotes, especially from Jessica Berman, saying, we'll live by our values, and our values are inclusion, right? And there's a big gap there and a lot of room for people to pry in and say, okay, but what are you actually doing, right? And because the history of the league, you know, they have stepped in at least when Barbara Banda has encountered hostility and abuse within an NWSL stadium, but the only reason that happened is because they didn't protect her in the first place, right? So now people feel emboldened that they can yell at these players and shout slurs or whatever is happening within a stadium, right? Which I think everybody wants to think in some idyllic world is a safe space, and that's not actually the case right at the moment. So because there is a lack of policy and because there is this sort of very vague, we'll live by our values without those values actively being articulated, this is what now, as Julie, who is a writer who I quoted in my column, who covers gender in sports, you know, now you're allowing Elizabeth Eddy to steer this conversation in a public venue, right? Like, was this raised to the NWSL itself? Jessica Berman has been doing a listening tour. She has gone through LA. Was it raised in one of those venues? Did she raise it to the PA, which would also be able to address this concern? Or did it go to social media and then the New York Post, right? Big questions.
Yeah. You mentioned Julie, Meg, but I was curious sort of and I know Melanie contributed some reporting to this piece as well. I think also what happens when there is no clearly articulated policy, I mean, you would have reported this op-ed, this column either way, but there is a lot more work, I imagine, that has to be done to sort of fill in the gaps of what's not being said. So what were you sort of getting from people like Julie and other folks that you spoke to? I know a lot of groups, supporters groups, some clubs release statements, but what were people sort of saying in between the gaps of that?
Yeah, I mean, what is really interesting, you know, we've seen so many supporters groups come out with like very unequivocal statements of like, absolutely not, right? Like, we're not going to tolerate something like this from Elizabeth Eddy. We know the dangers of it. We know that it's going to cause harm to players within the league, right? Like active participants of this league who would not actually fall under any such policy. It's not a problem. There are no trans players within the NWSL. There are no trans players within the immediate pipeline, right? Like, this is a made up problem as it stands right now. But again, with the lack of a policy, you're allowing that hypothetical to turn itself into a mini culture war within the NWSL and within women's sports as a whole. And what I think is going to be really interesting to watch, right? Like, there was this unspoken thing in the NWSL and the PA statements of, we're going to work together if we have to craft a policy, which was, I think, unspoken. We're not going to allow these outside actors to influence what might be right for this league. And that's like the best faith reading of that. The challenge that I see moving forward is that the supporters groups have taken that sort of like big moral stance, right? And like have actually staked a flag in the ground and said like, no, this far, no further. And the league has not met that moment and like has not shown moral clarity in this moment. And to Julie's point, has not actually defended their players because they're allowing for this. There's no neutrality in this argument, right? You're either going to be inclusive or you're not. And so can the league actually like meet the supporters where they're at, or do they want to take this approach of, you know, famously the Republicans buy shoes too?
Yeah. And speaking of like fallacies in this argument, one of the things that maybe is not ranking quite as high, but that still struck me in that piece was this argument about competitive advantage that just felt so cheap and empty, especially, as you pointed out, very spicily, I would say, in your column at the end. If we are even to entertain that idea, we need to think about credibility here. Mm-hmm. And I just find it funny that the people who tend to make these sorts of arguments, not just in women's soccer, but across sport, tend to not be the most credible voices on competitive advantage, given the contributions that they may have made to their teams when team sports are concerned, or individually, as you pointed out. And you provided a really compelling example with another player who has spoken out about trans inclusion in sport, Becky Sauerbrunn, who has won big stuff and contributed to her team's success. So to me, that's also a really dangerous argument because, as you mentioned, it's creating a problem that is not even there. Yeah,
I mean, Elizabeth Eddy writes in the piece, like, she's imagining this world where teams are going out and trying to recruit players to have some sort of, and there is not a single back room in any NWSL facility that has a whole bunch of people around a table being like, how do we sign a man to an NWSL team? Like, we're not in a ladybug situation here. This is not what's happening. And so I think it feels super disingenuous. And, you know, I think comparing the minutes played on championship team, like that was my one moment of pettiness that I really allowed myself. But I think when the column itself is saying like, I've won all of these titles, right? And to be fair, the New York Post is pulling this move, but Angel City star Elizabeth Eddy, right? Like there's the implication of this person has an outsized influence and a real, you know, just a pedigree.
Influential role.
Right,
on the team.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's not what's happening. And I think we've seen that playbook happening from other, you know, there were a lot of comparisons to Riley Gaines immediately, right? And I did not want to take it into that piece because I think we've got to keep it to our own little universe, but we have seen that playbook work. And so there is this sense of, is someone out there manipulating, right, Elizabeth Eddy, or someone convince her like this needs to be said, right? And you've got the platform to do it. And I don't have the answer to that. I honestly don't even think it matters because at the end of the day, her name is on it, her photo's on it, it's on her account, it's under, like, she's owning this viewpoint, and she thinks it's a fair conversation to have. So I think it's also a fair conversation to push back on and show, like, actually, this is not a fair conversation. It is, this rhetoric is going to cause harm, whether you believe that or not.
100%. I personally am tired of having to do this dance of call and response with things that there's so much more that we can and should be discussing around this game. And if only for that reason, I hope that this is the last time we need to have this conversation on this podcast or on social media, in person over coffee, in the group chats. Like, we need to move on. It's time, as this league is growing, expanding, becoming more high profile, it's time to get clear on some things. And the longer it feels to me that we go without that clarity, the more time we're going to be wasting, essentially. And time is increasingly gaining value for each of us individually and collectively who work in this game. And we need to be spending that value elsewhere, like, full stop. This feels in so many ways like a waste of time. And I am so glad that you wrote that piece. Please go read it at The Athletic if you have not, to catch up if you happen to miss this. I would almost envy you because, like I said, this should not even be a conversation. But I'm glad that the words are out there. I'm glad that we are making our stance on this clear. And hopefully the next time we revisit this, it's with a lot more certainty and clarity around how this league is going to approach gender eligibility. All right, 2 very different topics this week, but that's our show. We are always going to talk about the things that matter to us, the things that are important, regardless of how exhausting they might make us. So we appreciate you listening. We trust that you will reach out to us in all of the different ways on social media at TA Fulltime, like I said, on Instagram and TikTok. Feel free to send us an email if you have strong thoughts about the U.S. Women's National Team's performance in this October window, what you think might happen when they play Italy in a couple of months. Anything on your mind. We're also always posting fun content on Instagram and TikTok. So things that you're not even going to see or hear on this podcast are on socials. So please make sure that you're following us there. And make sure that you listen to Full-Time Focus as we pivot back to NWSL now that this international window is closed. Racing Louisville, girl, we are all rooting for you. Do the thing, please. Please.
I mean, that is the game. That is absolutely the game of the weekend. I don't know. Maybe Tamerra, you and I can like hang out on social and do it all.
Will it into existence, please. Yeah. But playoffs are just around the corner. We've got a lot of fun things planned for that. So make sure that you just stick with us because things are about to kick up several notches between now and the end of the year, just the next month. So buckle up, make sure that the snacks are prepped, get them on the grocery list for your next haul. We're about to get into it. And to make sure that you're all caught up with that, if you didn't know, The Athletic and Yahoo have partnered to deliver the very best coverage of women's sports, not only women's soccer, but if you like a good curation, I highly suggest that you check out the Women's Sports Hub at sports.yahoo.com/women-sports. We put the link to that, as always, in the show notes. And that's our show. I am Tamerra Griffin. Thank you so much for listening. I'm in New York for the next less than 48 hours. And let's just say I'm going to make the most of it. Make sure you're following me on Instagram and Blue Sky to keep up with the shenanigans.
I'm Meg. You can find me at Blue Sky and Instagram, and I will just still be enjoying all the fall things. Also, real quick, if you can donate to your local food bank, they're going to be needing help right now. So that's my mission for the day, is a grocery store run after recording the podcast and dropping off some supplies. They always have lists of what they actively need, or you can donate directly, but obviously that is more important than ever right now. And back on the show, you can always watch us on YouTube if that is your thing. You can find us at Fulltime over there as well.
100%. I love that call out. This show is not possible without podcast producer Theo Lloyd Hughes, video producer Leah Griffin, and our executive producer Emily Olson. Thank you, as always, for listening. Stay warm, stay hydrated, stay woke, honestly. And we'll see you next week.